I never gave much thought to my stepmom, not in a negative sense, but she always seemed distant and preoccupied with her own life. When she married my dad, I didn't expect us to bond. She was this elegant, composed woman who always seemed to have everything under control. I admired her from afar, respecting her space and boundaries. But over time, something subtle shifted between us. I began to notice her more, picking up on things I hadn't seen before. One afternoon, I came earlier than expected. Dad was away for the weekend, and the house felt unusually quiet. I wandered around, not really expecting to find anyone, until I heard faint sounds coming from the stables out back. My stepmom adored horses and spent hours with her favorite mare. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly headed towards the stable to see what she was up to. As I approached, I saw her standing there, gently running her fingers along the horse's side. Her touch was soft and delicate. The way she looked at the horse was unlike anything I had ever seen. There was a calmness in her, but something deeper as well. I leaned against the stable wall, watching her from a distance, entranced by the connection she shared with the animal. Her hand moved in slow, deliberate strokes, tracing patterns along the horse's coat, her body swaying slightly with each breath. She was unaware of my presence, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Her hair fell loosely around her face, framing her delicate features, and the way she moved was hypnotic. There was something so intimate about her interaction with the horse, as if she were lost in her own world, oblivious to everything else. I must have made a noise because suddenly she looked up, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment we just stared at each other, neither of us speaking. There was a strange tension in the air, something unspoken between us. My heart raced as I stood there, unsure of what to do next. Then she smiled softly, and that small gesture seemed to ease the tension. "Didn't know you were home," she said, her voice calm and smooth. I shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. "Just got back." She walked toward me, her hand still resting on the horse, her eyes never leaving mine. Something about her seemed different today, something I couldn't quite pinpoint. She felt warmer, more approachable, as if the usual distance between us had vanished. Standing closer, I could feel the warmth of her body, her perfume mixing with the earthy scent of the stable. "Do you like horses?" she asked softly. "I guess." "Never really thought about it," I replied, my voice barely audible. She stepped even closer, gently taking my hand and guiding it to the horse's neck. "Feel that?" she whispered. "How strong and calm they are. It's like they understand you without needing words." Her hand rested over mine, her touch light but firm. The way she spoke, the way she looked at me, was intimate. Our hands pressed together against the horse's soft coat. I could feel the warmth of her body, the light brush of her hair against my arm, and it stirred something within me that I didn't fully understand. Her eyes locked onto mine again, and for a moment everything else faded away. There was only her, standing so close, her lips slightly parted, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The air between us was thick with tension, but not the uncomfortable kind. It made my skin tingle. My heart raced, the kind of tension that made me want to lean in, to touch her, to feel more. We stood like that for what seemed like forever, neither of us moving, both caught in this strange, electric moment. Then, without warning, she stepped back, her eyes lingering on mine for a brief second before she turned away. The absence of her warmth hit me immediately, leaving me feeling hollow. "You should come out here more often," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she returned to the horse, her hand stroking its mane again. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to process what had just happened. But I knew one thing I wanted more. I wanted to feel her touch again, to stand that close to her, to be lost in that moment once more. In the days that followed, the memory of that moment haunted me. Every time I saw her, every time we crossed paths in the house, there was this unspoken tension between us, a secret we both shared but never talked about. It lingered, always present, and the more time passed, the more I found myself drawn to her, craving her attention, her touch, her presence. She started spending more time in the stables, and I found myself joining her more frequently. At first, we didn't talk much, just worked side by side, brushing the horses, feeding them, cleaning the stalls. But the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged with something more. Every time our hands brushed, every time our eyes met, that same tension returned, stronger than before. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the stable, she turned to me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. She stepped closer, her hand resting on my arm, her fingers slowly trailing down to my hand. "You've changed," she whispered, her voice low and husky. "I can see it in the way you look at me." My throat went dry, and I swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean," I lied, though we both knew the truth. She smiled softly, that same knowing smile she had given me in the stable the first time. "You know exactly what I mean," she said, her voice barely a whisper. And then, without warning, she leaned in, her lips brushing lightly against mine, so faintly I almost thought I had imagined it. But the sensation was real, and it sent a shockwave through my entire being. My heart pounded, my breath caught in my chest, and before I realized it, I was kissing her back, my hands instinctively moving to her waist, pulling her closer. Time seemed to slow as we stood there, lost in each other, the world around us fading into the background. Her lips were soft, warm, and every touch sent jolts of electricity through me. It felt like I had been waiting for this forever, like everything that had happened had led up to this exact moment. So when we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless, caught in the aftermath of the kiss. Though we didn't exchange any words, there was no need. Everything we felt and everything we wanted was captured in that kiss, in the way our bodies pressed together, and in how our breaths mingled in the cool night air. I had no idea where this would take us or what it would mean, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I craved more of her, more of these moments, more of the connection we had found. As we stood there, our breaths intertwining in the cool evening air, something between us shifted. The tension that had been simmering for so long finally broke, and we both realized there was no turning back. She gazed up at me, her eyes full of warmth and something deeper, more intimate. Her hand gently squeezed mine, a quiet invitation, and without hesitating, I accepted. I held her hand in mine, leading her out of the stable and back toward the house. Inside, the air felt different, charged with an unspoken electricity. The stillness of the evening wrapped around us as we moved through the house together, our steps slow, deliberate. Every moment seemed intensified, every glance, every touch sparking something between us. Words weren't necessary anymore. There was a silent understanding between us, a connection that had evolved beyond what either of us could control. Once we reached the living room, she turned to me, her fingers lightly tracing the outline of my jaw, her touch gentle but purposeful. I pulled her closer, wrapping my arms around her waist, our bodies pressing together in a way that felt so natural, like this was how it was always meant to be. She sighed softly as I leaned in, brushing my lips against hers again. The kiss started slow and tender, but soon deepened as the desire between us grew. We moved together, our hands exploring each other, learning the curves, the lines, and the warmth of every inch of skin. It was more than just physical. There was something deeper, something that made each moment feel intimate and connected, as though we were sharing more than just passion. She took my hand and led me to the couch, sitting beside me with her legs tucked beneath her. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. We sat there for a while, enveloped in the quiet of the room, simply holding each other, content in the simplicity of just being together. It was the kind of moment that didn't require words, the kind where just being near each other was enough. After some time, she lifted her head, her fingers gently tracing patterns on my arm. "This feels right," she whispered, her voice soft, almost unsure. I nodded, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "It does," I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. There was something so personal in the way she looked at me, as if she could see right through me, into parts of myself I hadn't even known were there. We kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment, taking our time. There was no need to rush, we had all the time in the world, and we intended to use every second of it. Her lips were soft and sweet, and as we explored each other, there was a tenderness I hadn't anticipated. It was as if every kiss, every touch, was a silent promise, a declaration of all the things we felt but hadn't spoken. Eventually, we made our way to her bedroom. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, casting a warm, golden light across the bed. She paused by the door for a moment, watching me, her eyes filled with desire but also something more: trust, vulnerability. I crossed the room, cupping her face in my hands and kissing her deeply, passionately, conveying through every touch how much I wanted her and how much this meant to me. We moved to the bed, our bodies coming together in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Each kiss, each touch, grew more intimate as we lost ourselves in each other, the world outside fading away. Our connection deepened with every moment, every touch, as if we were learning more about each other than just the physical. It felt raw, real, like we were discovering parts of ourselves through each other. Afterward, we lay together, our bodies entwined, her head resting on my chest as I gently stroked her hair. The silence between us was comfortable, filled with the kind of quiet that comes from truly understanding one another. I felt her breathing slow as she relaxed against me, her body soft and warm in my arms. It felt right, like this was exactly where we were supposed to be. After a while, she looked up at me, her fingers drawing light circles on my chest. "I've never felt like this before," she admitted softly, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled down at her, placing a soft kiss on her forehead. "Me neither," I whispered back, "but I'm glad it's with you." We spent the rest of the evening wrapped up in each other, talking, laughing, kissing, exploring every inch of one another, as if we couldn't get enough. It was as though the outside world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us, lost in our own little bubble of warmth and connection. In the days that followed, things between us only became more intense. We found ourselves spending more time together, finding any excuse to touch, to kiss, to be close. We became inseparable, finding comfort in each other's arms, and joy in the simplest moments, whether cooking together, watching a movie on the couch, or just walking through the house hand in hand. We acted as if we had always been a couple. And in every possible way, it felt right, as though this was how things were always destined to be. We shared everything: the laughter, the secrets, and the quiet moments that were more intimate than words could ever convey. Each day brought something different, a deeper connection, a stronger bond. We never discussed what we were or put a label on it, but we didn't need to. We both understood what this was and what it meant. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how much I wanted this, how much I wanted her. She wasn't just my stepmom anymore. She was the woman I cared for, the woman I wanted to be with, the one who had somehow become the most important person in my life. So there was no denying it. We were a couple in every sense, and I wouldn't have it any other way. As the days turned into weeks, our relationship became more intense, and the lines between who we were and who we used to be blurred completely. We moved in harmony, understanding each other without needing to speak, finding comfort in fleeting glances and gentle touches. Yet there was always this lingering hunger between us, a desire that had only grown stronger with time. We couldn't get enough of each other, and every moment apart felt like an eternity. One evening, we found ourselves alone in the house again, the air thick with anticipation. She stood before me, her eyes locking with mine, and without saying a word, she took my hand and led me upstairs to her room. The door clicked shut behind us, and the tension in the room became nearly tangible. I could feel my breath quicken as she moved closer, her fingers lightly tracing along my jaw, her touch sending sparks through me. She leaned in slowly, her lips brushing against mine just enough to tease, drawing me in with every soft breath. My hands instinctively found her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between us. Our bodies pressed together, our kiss filled with a kind of urgency we hadn't let ourselves feel before. Every touch, every kiss was more intense, more meaningful, as though we were pouring everything we had into this moment, allowing it to build into something unstoppable. She whispered my name, her voice thick with desire, and in that instant, it felt as though the world outside had vanished. There was only her, only us, entwined in a whirlwind of passion and longing that had been building for so long. Her hands explored my body, tracing every inch of my skin, while mine did the same, memorizing every curve and every delicate line. The intensity of it all was almost overwhelming, but I didn't want to stop. As we moved together, our connection deepened, becoming something far beyond the physical. It was as though our souls had intertwined, making it impossible to tell where one of us ended and the other began. The intensity between us grew until it was almost too much to handle, and as we reached the peak of our desire, it felt like the rest of the world faded away, leaving just the two of us, lost in one another in a moment that would stay with us long after the night was over.